the Lord require of thee? What doth the Lord require of thee? But to do justly, love, mercy, walk humbly with God. Woe unto thee, who issue oppressive decree. They should do justly, love, mercy, walk humbly with God. What does the Lord require of thee? What does the Lord require of thee? But to do justly, love, mercy, walk humbly
Expansion of the Labor Standards Act for protecting voting rights, health care, education. In other words, they were fighting for full humanity. And there were 1,100 actions all over the country where people were marching or in jail. And people were in jail. James Foreman was. Some students, male and female, down in South Carolina facing the death penalty for having sat down at lunch counters. We had seen in that year already 63 children, male and female, having dogs and hoses sicked on them. 1963 in May, they won the Birmingham campaign. We had seen Medgar Evers be shot and killed. In June, we had seen the great march that happened in Detroit before ever the March on Washington occurred. And we would see later in that year, after the March on Washington, 4 little girls blown up in a Birmingham church. And then even the president would be felled by an assassin's bullet. And yet the people came, not just for one person or for one speech, but they came to raise their collective voices. The actual speech that day Dr. King would deliver would be entitled "Normalcy Never Again." They came to say no to forms of injustice. They came to say yes to breaking free of the nightmare and embracing the dream. That's why they came. I was not even born at the time. I would be born 2 days later on August the 30th. My mother was in labor, and she said that it was though I asked her to stop to see what was going to happen at this gathering. But also 60 years ago, because we have to look accurately at history, there was missing sound. That sound was Rachel crying because her children were no more. That was the missing sound of Lena Horne or Emmett Till's mama or Rosa Parks for more than 27 words. Missing sound of so many powerful women. Missing sound of Ann Hedgebeth, who organized over 40,000 people to march herself, but did not get an opportunity at the mic, or Daisy Bates, or some of the young girls that marched and were a part of the Brown versus Board of Education decision. Or Diane Nash, who chose not to go and chose to go instead to Selma to begin to work for what she knew would come eventually, a Selma campaign. Missing sound, Dorothy Day, a Catholic workers' rights woman, was missing sound. Thousands and thousands were missing sound. The voice of women and sisters in any significant way. Well, they were there. Mayor Hillier sang, and as I said, Rosa Parks got 27 seconds. And there was one other that got a few sometime. And of course, Joan Baez sang with her guitar, "We Shall Overcome." But the Bible says on the day of Pentecost, God's Spirit was poured out on all of them, male and female. And when you look down through the course of history, our Mother God has always been birthing her daughters. And our Father God has always been bringing forth his women, whether it was Miriam being a prophetess in the day of Moses, Sarah, or Hagar, who was put out and yet God kept her, or Deborah, who had the ministry of agitation in the Bible and whose judgeship made her powerful. Some say she was the first woman preacher mentioned in the Bible because it was never mentioned that Miriam preached. But Deborah who was so powerful and would not allow the nation to wallow in despair. What about those two women, Shiphrah and Puah, who stood up to Pharaoh and birthed Moses and a whole lot of other male babies? Even Pharaoh said, kill them all before they even come out of the mother's womb, so he won't have to deal with it. What about all those unnamed names? What about in the New Testament, an apostle named Junior, Paul says ought to be commended? Or that woman named Dorcas, who people didn't want to die because she was so powerful in the community. Or that woman, Mary Magdalene, who had been troubled with demons, but on the day of the resurrection, she was the one that preached the resurrection sermon, the first one to declare that Jesus was alive and well. What about all of these women, the wailing women that Jeremiah talked about, his own mother, who wailed and wailed until they got God's attention. What about the sound of Rachel crying because her children are no more? What about down through history, the women like Harriet Tubman who didn't just have epilepsy but would fight and would stand to get people free? Or Rosa Parks who didn't just sit down by herself but strategized and went to Highlander and was trained by other women in nonviolent transformation before she sat down. What about so many? Well, what about Mother Jones who said that we pray for the dead and we fight like hell for the living up in eastern Kentucky? What about the lady who wrote the song, Which Side Are You On? Which side are you on? When the bosses came to take her husband who had been fighting with miners against the bosses in eastern Kentucky. What about Paula Merritt, that great woman from up in the Yale area, lawyer, preacher, lesbian? What about Lorraine Hansberry? What about the women who wrote so much of the poor? What about Mom's Baby who asked that question, have you seen my friend Martin? Have you seen my friend? What about the Native American women? What about the women who stood with the Latino community? What about Asian women? There was a strange missing sound, an important missing sound, a strong missing sound. What about Coretta? I don't think it was because people were mean. I think it was because of the time. But whatever it was, it must be corrected. So tonight, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people are joining online for She Speaks, the National Moral Monday sponsored by the Repairs of Breach, Black Voters Matter, Legal Women Voters, SEIU, the Beloved Community, and so many others. More than 35 powerful women, voices from every race, creed, and color. Will not be silent. We're not just speaking to women's issues, but speaking as women, as prophets, as moral voices, declaring what we must hear in this time. Talking to us about what we are facing in this time, where we are. What is the moral requirement? Did you not hear Donna Allen already articulate for all the women? Question that we must answer, male and female, gay and straight. At the end of the day, what doth the Lord require but to do justice and to love mercy, walk humbly before our God? So I'm glad just to be able to say a word of introduction. Go tell people, get them right now. Go get them. Tell them tune in. Oh, because she is getting ready to speak. Women are speaking. Sisters are speaking. The trumpet. Those who love the Mother God and the Father God. Those who know how to speak Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Unitarian. All are coming. They're getting ready to speak. They're getting ready to say a word. Not only getting ready to speak, they're getting ready to put words into action. Words into action because they know they cannot be silent anymore. And just before we go to Reverend Hannah Broom, who's the Director of Religious Affairs for Repairs of the Breach, has been point on this, along with Attorney Valerie Equivon, the Center for Yale, and Reverend Casimir Brown, who's the Executive Director for Repairs of the Breach, and Rosalind Hellis, who's a Special Advisor, and also Joyce Johnson and Virginia with the League of Women Voters, Tasha Brown, and all of those, Mary Kay. Before we go to them, what if we could just hear a word about and from Coretta? Yeah, Coretta Scott King. She didn't speak that day, but she did speak. She spoke out against the war even before Martin did. She spoke at the Poor People's Campaign when, even after his assassination, she spoke. 15 days later, she spoke at the Poor People's Campaign. She spoke and she sang, and she kept on speaking and kept on allowing the words of articulation to be turned into deeds of articulation. So the words are more than just words. The power of life and death is in the tongue. So as I talked to her daughter yesterday, Bernice, who's a powerful prophet in her own right, she said, yeah, it's all right. Play this piece where others are talking about what her mother's voice meant to the movement and to them. And then we'll let Reverend Hannah Broom take over, and the women who are already right there at the Lincoln Memorial, because part of this is right at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, where women were not allowed or did not speak 60 years ago. But today, he speaks, and this is being recorded for history and be promulgated everywhere. So go get somebody, go to www.preachprepare.org, go to the landing page on C Speaks, call somebody, get them, so you can hear the word of power, the word of agitation, the word of anointing, the word of transformation, so you can hear the call to conscience, so you can hear the agenda for the call to conscience, and share it with people, your sons and your daughters, that they might prophesy and be instruments of challenge and change in this world. Let's hear from Coretta.
The nonviolent movement for social change must be properly interpreted, as well as developing programs that will deal with the issues of today.
Dear Coretta.
Dear Coretta.
Dear phenomenal woman.
Dear Mother, I can still hear your voice lifted in song. I can still see the warmth in your eyes and feel the gentle wisdom of your words.
You had a vision of the future that felt impossible to so many. But your faith, fortitude, and integrity laid the groundwork for it to become a reality.
Thank you, Mrs. Coretta.
For creating, for singing, for leading, for being.
Heal the wounded soul. There is a Lord.
You didn't just teach it, you lived it. You told your own story in your own words. When others spoke over you, you let your actions be a guide for those who chose to see.
You are glorious, not because you are perfect, but because life's imperfections taught you grace. Sharpen your compassion and your passions.
At this point, I feel even stronger, and I want you to know that you have my utmost support.
You stared down hate, stood firm in your beliefs,
Protected the small, prepared a place for those who were oppressed. You showed us that resistance is a discipline, integrity is a practice in empathy, and courage can be cultivated by each and every one of us.
When people decide to be free and they are united together in that effort, nothing can stop them.
You weathered storms, rebuilt from charred embers, conquered fear, and laughed a lot.
you told us that we could be anything and that our circumstances didn't define our greatness. Most of all, you taught us that our dreams matter. Dear Coretta.
Dear Coretta.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone, physically and virtually. We are standing on the steps live at the Lincoln Memorial on the actual day of the March on Washington. I am Reverend Dr. Hannah R. Broom, National Director of Repairs of the Breach, along with Black Voters Matter, the League of Women Voters, and Beloved Community. We are here because 60 years ago, on this exact day, August the 28th, 1963, women's voices were silenced. Today, 60 years later, we as women are standing in solidarity on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. We come to call the nation to conscience. Did you know that cultural war distractions are blinding us from poverty being the fourth leading cause of death? In 1963, African Americans had a poverty rate 3 times that of white Americans. 60 years later, that poverty rate has only lowered to 2.5 times the rate. Did you know that 50 million women live in poverty as of 2023? Did you know that more than 55 million workers are not receiving a sustainable living wage? Did you know that you can buy unleaded gas, but not unleaded water? Did you know that millions lack health care access or affordable health care options? Did you know that 350,000 died from the lack of access to health care? Did you know that we have less voting rights protection now than 60 years ago? Did you know that the number of children in poverty decreased during COVID due to the child tax credit? But they allowed this to expire, plunging more children into poverty in 2023. Did you know that mass incarceration directly impacts millions of people? Most face collateral consequences such as voting, housing, education, employment, and other restrictions. Did you know that 60 years ago, the demands of the protest march on Washington for jobs and justice occurred amid racial tension and violence? Today, we still face these issues of racism, poverty, low wages, access to health care, over-militarization of our neighborhoods, gun violence. Today, we still have not secured all voting rights. Protection, we have not secured protection against gun violence. We have not secured sustainable living wages. So 60 years later, as women and people of moral conscience, we come not to have a celebration of nostalgic fellowship, but to once again call the people of conscience to declare we need mass protest organizing and voter participation across this country. Did you know that 60 years ago, mass protest was not about one woman or one man's speech? It wasn't about celebrities. It was about a united front against social injustice that was hurting people of every race, creed, color, or region, and we demand a change. 30+ women who represent thousands of people will lift their voices virtually with a rallying cry to the call to the nations in this space that we call now. Now, during a time of hatred. Now, during a time when prejudice and bigotry are legislated, approved, and executed. Now, in a time when powers and authority positions have no compassion for those with no money or no hope. Now, during a time where mass shootings in our communities have become like the normal call of the day. Now, during a time when the true history is being whitewashed for comfortability instead of transformation. Now, during a time when poverty is the 4th leading cause of death. Now, during a time when equal pay for equal work remains elusive for many. Now, when we grapple with the lack of progress in vital areas such as voting rights, criminal justice reform, common sense gun legislation, and the persistent shadow of gender and racial discrimination, we have come on the exact day 60 years later to demand the eradication of poverty. Poverty must be confronted head on. Poverty should not persist in a nation as prosperous as ours. We demand that voting rights be fully restored and protected as well as enhanced. The cornerstone of our democracy must be fortified and not weakened. We demand that resources be allocated to climate justice, that climate justice becomes a reality, ensuring a sustainable world for future generations. Climate justice is not just a choice, but an obligation for the future. We demand access to affordable health care must be guaranteed for all citizens, not just for the fortunate few, but for every citizen. The guarantee of affordable health care includes reproductive health care for women, because access to affordable health care is a fundamental right and is not a privilege. We demand humane immigration legislation that reflects the compassion and inclusivity upon which our great nation should aspire to fulfill. We demand comprehensive gun safety measures that balance the rights of responsible gun owners with the urgent need to prevent mass shootings and domestic violence situations. These are tragedies in our neighborhoods. We demand criminal justice reform through education, dedicated investment resources, advocacy, and collaboration through policy changes that promote justice and equality. So we are gathering on today. We are gathering here to be a moral imperative. With our moral duty is crystal clear. We stand united in defense of equality and justice with these call to action, because this life-saving agenda is still unfulfilled in totality. We are issuing a call to conscience from women across this country, industries, faith communities, ethnicities, and backgrounds to raise our voices, rally our communities, and we are committed to mobilizing our community to get informed about their voting rights and fight for them. Organize voter registration, voter education, and voter engagement. Reclaim our prophetic and moral voices, challenging powers that seek to divide and destroy us, and speak out against unjust laws, practices, and actions. Engage in the work by connecting with organizations to build a fusion movement to create a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect and is allowed to fulfill the pursuit of life with value. As we witness these scaffolds and cement and construction enveloping the Lincoln Memorial, we are reminded that progress is not linear. It requires effort, it requires change, and it requires you. Coretta Scott King said it best: when you're willing to make sacrifices for a great cause, you are never alone. We stand here today, 60 years later, where women could not stand and speak. We stand here today, 60 years later, calling for the promises to be fulfilled of equality, of equity, and justice. Women who represent thousands across this country will now begin to proclaim with a rallying cry and call this nation to conscience. We demand you listen.
Wow. We demand that you listen. And the sisters were clear to tell me that the demand from women that they be listened to is not a speaking against men. It actually is an embracing. Sister Latasha Brown made that very clear, because we need all hands on deck. Did you hear the litany of issues of where we are, but that we don't have to be there? Poverty, the fourth leading cause of death, but it doesn't have to be that way. 4 or 5 of the things that Dr. Boone mentioned, if they were implemented, we could end 60% of poverty in one day. And thank God for those sisters representing the other organizations that were standing there, not in silence, no, but in solidarity. Not in quietness, but in commitment, because their very faces and bodies speak. They were representing the unity. They were saying that when one of us speaks, we never stand at the podium alone. We always stand in community, always in community. As we prepare now to hear from women all over the country, let us remember right now those who were killed in Jacksonville. Those who were killed, 2 of them were under 30. 2 women, 1 male. 2 of them were under 30. Shot down by violence. Violence first perpetrated in the mouths of politicians, using culture wars to scare us and say that trans people are our enemies and Black history is our enemy, and gay people are our enemies, and women's rights are our enemy. Distracting things, while in fact, the same politicians, even in that state, as high as the governor and others, aren't fighting for women to have living wages, aren't fighting for women or men to have health care. Did you hear what she said? 350,000 people died during COVID, not from COVID, but from the lack of health care. Oh, it's time for coming together. It's time for the rejected voices. It's time for a fresh third reconstruction and a political Pentecost where the Spirit is poured out on all, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. So thank you all for standing in that space today and correcting for eternity something that should have never been, and tonight correcting, but not just with a nostalgic look backwards, but with a call to conscience and a call to action, as Rosalind Peller says, an analysis and an agenda for today and for right now. In the church, when people are speaking, and we know they're speaking unto the power of truth and justice and God, somebody will say, "Say it, sister." Somebody will say, "Speak." Somebody will say, "Tell the story." Somebody will say, "Let the Lord use you." Somebody will say, "Stand tall." Somebody will say, "I see your help has come." Somebody will say, "Speak, sister. Speak, sister. Speak, sister." Let it be so tonight.
On August 28, 1963, I attended the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Early that morning, I boarded a bus in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, headed to D.C. Already active in the civil rights movement led by the Congress of Racial Equality and headquartered in my church, I looked forward to joining others from all across the country who, like me, had been in marches and on picket lines and were committed to making this country live up to its promise of equality for all people. Arriving in D.C. was much more than I could ever have imagined. Men, women, and children filled the mall in numbers greater than had ever been assembled. 250,000 people. We were all there from big cities, small towns, urban and rural areas. We were Black and white and Latino and Asian, all uniting to make our collective voices heard as we demanded economic security, justice, and equality. It was a pivotal day for the movement. We sent a message to this nation. This was a struggle that would be won. As I headed home that evening, excited about the day and the work ahead, analyzing the day as much as a 14-year-old could, I wondered why so few women had spoken that day and that we had heard from so many men. This was part of my thinking because in my hometown, women and girls were important organizers, strategists, and spokespersons for our movement. And women, old and young, were national leaders and represented on the mall in great numbers. The voices of women were muted on that day, despite their presence on the front line in cities across the country. Of course, now some things have changed. Laws have changed. The leadership and voices of women are being heard and recognized. Women are being heard on all issues that impact society and those specifically affecting women. Good jobs, access to health care, reproductive rights, and others. However, we, women and justice-loving people, must be vigilant as we see the nation once again taking a turn to the right. Today, we women must and will continue our work. We all must ensure that the work and voices of women be elevated. This is the source of our power and hope for the nation. Women speak.
Go. This 60th anniversary, we commemorate the March on Washington. Today, we stand again with a renewed commitment to jobs, justice, equal rights for women, our health care, and yes, our voting rights. Today, women across the country stand together in our power to fight against racism, sexism, and discrimination. At LWV, we believe in the power of women to create a more perfect democracy. And we believe that together we will win. But we need you. We need you to join us in this fight because it's not over. Today, our children have less rights than we had 50 years ago. The future of girls tomorrow will have less rights than we had as little girls. And we need to continue to stand up and fight to make sure that women's voices are heard. Now, the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington, it was a powerful moment. But women, our voices were missing that day. And this is an opportunity, this 60th anniversary, to right that wrong. And for all of you to come together with us to make sure that our voices are heard, that women's voices are heard, so that we can create a better future for all of us. To have a multicultural, multiracial democracy where everyone has the opportunity to live their lives free from fear and discrimination. Please join us. Thank you.
On a cold December morning and about 76 years ago, I made my official entry into this world in Richmond, Virginia, the former capital of the Confederacy, at the home of my maternal grandmother and in the nurturing shadow of First Baptist Church, South Richmond. Big Mama didn't trust the racist hospital, but took care of my mother and me at home, where the potbelly stove replaced the incubator. By the grace of God and with the determination of mostly women around me, I survived and became committed to serving that same community that nurtured me while growing up in segregated South. I've been aware of and suffered from injustices and inequities all my life. But what I learned from my grandmother, my mother, the women around my neighborhood, my church, my school, is that all life is valuable and precious, and that if we work together across human constructs of race and income, gender, sexual orientation, whatever, we can all make a way out of no way and achieve our God-given potentials. Back during the first March on Washington, we were focused on jobs, income, freedom, civil rights, voting rights, and racial equality. Those struggles continue today as we struggle for the same things. We women have been at the forefront of all of those struggles. I still remember the first time I met and spoke with Reverend Dr. King, not too long after the 1963 March. While I was a young 17-year-old freshman at Duke University, one of less than 10 Black students on that campus at the time, I assured him that I was in this fight for the entirety of my life, for the long haul. I was already supporting the non-academic employees' fight for a union on that campus while I was a student. I became immersed in struggles for equity and justice throughout North Carolina, where I made my home, got married, raised children, and now am blessed with grandchildren. It's taken longer than I thought, but however long it takes, our struggles must be one of moral conscience, rooted in truth. It must be for the beloved community, where the dignity, the worth, the equality, and the enormous potential of all God's people is realized, no matter what the differences among us might be. God did not place us on earth of insufficiency. All that we need is right here. We must learn how to live peaceably together, dividing things up as God would have it, not as our greed would direct us. All that we need to do is to learn how to love mercy, do justice, and walk humbly with our God. I call on each and every one who hears my voice, especially women, to join hands and fight for the fullness of life that God offers each of us. Let's walk together and not grow weary, or as we say in North Carolina, forward together and not one step back.
Well, the first thing I did right was the day I started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. Greetings as we celebrate and commemorate the 60th anniversary on the March for Jobs and Freedom, a march that thousands, hundreds of thousands of people all throughout this nation 60 years ago came together with this explicit purpose of they were going to fight and stand against poverty, stand against police brutality, and economic injustice and jobs. That is, we continue to have to hold that mantle in this moment right now, with millions of people that are unemployed or underemployed, with folks that are living, millions of us that are living in poverty or below the poverty line. The fact that we are in the wealthiest country in the world, we have to demand that we have a more equitable redistribution of wealth, to all of us that when people are actually working, they're getting paid for the work that they're doing so that they can actually have the quality of life that they desire, they deserve. We have to demand that we have voting rights. This is a moment right now that we're seeing voting rights be attacked all over this nation. And it's incumbent upon us to actually do the work that needs to be done to make sure that we have federal protection, but also on the state level. We have to get engaged on every single level, from the local to the state to the federal level. And then this is a moment, I think, for us to really think about what is being called of us in this moment. In this moment, I think the first thing is we're called into remembrance, and to remembrance of what is that has been done. That in the 60 years ago, in the March for Jobs and Freedom, like what were some of the tenets of that, and how does that affect us and impact what we're doing now? In the remembrance that even in the march that was powerful, that was centered in the civil rights, and civil rights principles, there was also a missing voice, and that was the voices of women. And that as women, as we're come together and as communities, a community of consciousness, that we have to make a commitment that we will never allow ourselves to get to the point that we are marginalizing the voices of any of our people in our communities. And we have to stand on the space that as we organize and go forward, that we learn and we build and we evolve in another space around that. The second thing I think that we have to do is we have to recommit ourselves. This is a moment for us to really look at what's happening around us and know that we are the ones that are being called to be the voice in the wilderness, that we're the ones that are being called to speak to the dry bones so that people can live again, that they can have hope, that they can believe in something that is greater than what their experience is right now, and that we have to also believe that we can create that we can radically reimagine every single system in this country to create the kind of environment that people can have the kind of quality of life that they deserve, that we're in the wealthiest country in the world. People should have health care. People should get paid a fair and decent wage. Folks should have their basic needs met. Not a single child should go to bed hungry at night. And all those things are possible because we who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Peace and blessings.
My name is Mindy, and I got my start in activism protesting for reproductive rights because deciding when and whether or not to have kids is a personal choice that affects every aspect of a person's life. In the 20 years I've worked at McDonald's, I have witnessed firsthand how poverty and reproductive justice intersect. I've listened as coworkers casually talk about going to the food pantry or how they filled up on bread the night before so that their children could have a decent meal. These women not only struggle to put food on the table, they also have to juggle their schedules around childcare, school, and doctor's appointments. And without meaningful sick leave, they lose money every time they miss work. Bodily autonomy is maybe the most fundamental of rights, but we cannot ignore how poverty and lack of living wages affect our ability to take care of our children we want to have and our ability to not have children when we don't. The Poor People's Campaign is addressing all of the issues I care about in order to make a better future for us all. And I am so excited the campaign is using this event to lift the voices of women who so often go unheard.
Hello, my name is Vanessa Nosey. I'm a member of the Apache Stronghold. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you all today. I stand here before you not only as an Apache woman, but as a mother fighting to protect her children, fighting for those yet to be born. We are facing this injustice throughout this country, not only the indigenous people, but all people. But as Apache people, we are fighting a system that wasn't made for us, a system that wanted us extinct. The same system that is continuing to destroy our holy place, Chichil-Bethagiltil. If it is gone, if it is destroyed, my children will no longer be Apache. My children will not have the direct connection to Yosen, God, our Creator. And that's why he's fighting. That's why I'm fighting. But it takes all of us, because this injustice that we are facing, the United States government didn't reinvent the wheel when they did it to the indigenous people. They just placed us all together now. And it's time for us to unite. It's time for us to come together. The Apache Stronghold has been an example of how still today the United States government disregards our religion and our way of life. disregards our holy site that was given to us by Yulson. When in our Ninth Circuit Court, the United States government has allowed Resolution Copper to come in and fight with them, to stand with them, to destroy a religion, to destroy our holy place. That's the injustice that not only are we facing, but all people are facing. Because if the United States government can do this to the First Nation people, they don't care who they're doing it to. The only concern is money and power. We need to make them realize to have a moral decision and to do what's right for the people. As we're facing this evil that is across this country, it is going to take prayer and unification to conquer that evil and to rise together so that our future generations have a future to live in, have a world to live in, because the way we are going, it is uncertain. But let's pray and come together and be one. One drum, one prayer, one circle. Thank you.
Today, we remember the march and the movement, but let's also remember the women who work behind the scenes, like our own National Council of Churches, Anna Arnold Hedgeman, the only woman on the organizing committee, the iconic Dr. Dorothy Height, and Aung San Suu Kyi, who sat on the stage, and Mahalia Jackson, who sang, and Daisy Bates, who spoke. Today is also the day when we must stand up and declare that we don't have any more time for foolishness. No more time for the foolishness of mean-spirited people who perpetrate unnecessary evil, that force us to make bricks without straw, bread without yeast, lemonade with no lemons, or make a home without a livable wage. We don't have time for this foolishness of dismantling of truth and allow it to sit in the back of the bus, while clever replicas of truth are allowed to be verified as truth. The protracted diversionary tactics designed to keep us off balance. Oh, no more time, no more foolishness for the wickedness in high places, toxic leadership, delusional leaders that not only intimidate, but seek to annihilate anyone or anything that gets in their way. These dictator tendencies and scare tactics have created a more divided United States, with the rise of violent politics where democracy is no longer in danger, it's on life support. In honoring the unsung heroes of the March on Washington, we must also work towards addressing the inequities that women still face today. We must challenge the gender pay gap, fight to get our rights back, all of them, and advocate for policies that support work-life balance. We must support and uplift everyone, including those who are marginalized due to their race, ethnicity, socioeconomic background. Your zip code should not determine your lifespan. This is where we say in our best Fannie Lou Hamer voice, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. This is where we pull up our own folding chair to the table and declare like Shirley Chisholm, you don't make progress by standing on the sidelines, whimpering and complaining. You make progress by implementing ideas. This is where we put our hats on like Dorothy Height and declare we may not do what we want to do, but we will do what we have to do. This is where we declare like the biblical Esther, if I perish, I perish. I'm going all the way until justice rolled down like a mighty stream. Reinhold Niebuhr says, man's capacity for justice makes democracy possible, but man's inclination to injustice makes democracy necessary. The future is counting on what we do today. Let's go to work to continue the work.
Hello, I'm Mary Kay Henry, President of the Service Employees International Union. The spirit of the March on Washington is carried by the millions of Black, Brown, Asian, immigrant, and white working people who are demanding good jobs and freedom. Our demand today is unions for all, where every worker gets respected, protected, and paid, no matter what job they do. And we know we can't win good jobs and freedom and unions for all workers unless we link the fights for racial and economic justice. That's why Black and Brown home care workers were excluded from labor rights and Social Security back in the 1930s. That's why gig workers are fighting state by state by state to get written in and recognized. That's why airport service workers are organizing as we speak to demand that Congress write them in. That's why workers are taking on giant corporations like Amazon and Starbucks, and why we are backing the Starbucks Workers United demand for a seat at the table with the most profitable coffee company in the world. 2 million service and care workers are proud to join the Women Speak Out to mark the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. And as the first elected woman president of SEIU in our 100-year history, I'm proud to have women's voices loud and proud and clear in this march. Each of these workers were excluded from labor law and protections because of race. And that's why the March on Washington was so significant in the 60s, and that's why this anniversary celebration is vital now. We have to link the fights for racial and economic justice, and we have to up our demand for good jobs and freedom. Join us. We want unions for all workers, so we have the power to confront corporations and to uproot systemic racism once and for all.
My name is Ai-jen Poo, and I'm the president of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. At the National Domestic Workers Alliance, we represent the 2.2 million women who work inside of our homes, as nannies taking care of our children, as home care workers taking care of our aging and disabled loved ones, as house cleaners caring for our homes. It's the work that makes all other work possible in our economy. It's a workforce that is majority women of color, just as domestic workers have always been majority Black and brown women who are also mothers, caregivers for our own families, creators, leaders in the community. And to this day, most domestic workers in our country earn less than $12 per hour, have no health insurance, no job security, no paid time off. The women who we count on to take care of us and our families can't take care of themselves or their own families doing this work. And that is why we are a part of a proud tradition of Black women organizers and leaders, from washerwomen who went on strike for better pay in 1881 to Dorothy Lee Bolden, a domestic worker from Atlanta, Georgia, who founded the National Domestic Workers Union as a part of the growing movement for civil rights and economic justice in the 60s and 70s. Many of the women who are part of the March on Washington were domestic workers. They knew they had to be there because the March on Washington was fundamentally a march about dignity. And to this day, we continue that fight. We continue in that spirit and that commitment to dignity as we fight for livable wages, for citizenship for immigrants, for good jobs for care workers, for the ability to take care of our families, child care, paid leave, home care for our aging and disabled loved ones. It's all about dignity, and we carry that fight forward with power, with humility, with pride alongside all of you.
Hello on this special day of commemoration of the March on Washington. I am Reverend Dr. Iva Carruthers, General Secretary of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. I have just returned from a 10-day visit in Brazil with women leadership there, talking about the power of our connectivity. Our global actions, our global visions, and our voices matter. And we will not be silenced or disconnected by book bannings or even bullets. We know that silence makes a mighty noise, and we will always speak our truth. It was Prathia Hall and Mahalia Jackson who spoke truth and gave Dr. Martin Luther King the word for the March on Washington 60 years ago. It was Winnie Mandela who was in Brazil and then came to the U.S. to connect our anti-apartheid movement with our civil rights movement, with our human rights movement. And today it is Black women in the courthouses, Black women in the White Houses, in the boardrooms, and Black women in the faith houses who again give us the power to keep moving forward. We know a people never rise above its women. And so we rise with the power of God, and we rise with the ancestral power of those women who have gone before. We will move forward on that power. And I wish each and every one of us a day to go to the well to get renewed and re-inspired to do the work we must do, because we will not rest until justice comes. Thank you. Have a blessed, powerful day.
When you think of the unhoused population, what comes to mind? Matter of fact, who comes to mind? This population of persons experiencing homelessness is not a new factor of our society. It's one of the oldest ones that continue to plague our communities. When you see homeless people, you should see your sister, your brother, your cousin, your father, your mother, your uncle or your aunt, or maybe even your children. You should realize that in this nation, we are all one check away from being homeless. Homelessness is not a disease that can solely be cured with housing. It is an experience that can be eradicated with community resources, mental health clinics, healthcare, adequate living wages, and affordable housing. We need livable wages that can lift people out of poverty and promote the dream of independence. We should be a nation that responds and gives aid to persons with care and concern and support those in public, as this is a public concern. We should provide resources on all levels to promote success. I challenge you at this time to consider a nation without poverty as a country that will be unlimited as well as fulfill its promise. We should fund organizations that strive to promote change in the community, that work towards a mission to not only end homelessness, but also end poverty, and continue to work with persons who have barriers that are limiting them from achieving the real American dream.
I am Glenda Baskin Glover. I serve as president of Tennessee State University and immediate past international president of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority. It is a tremendous honor to be here and to present the case for support for HBCUs as we highlight education as one of the key aspects of reducing poverty. If ever there was a time that we needed to support HBCU endeavors, that time is now. If ever there was a time that we needed each other, that time is now. As an HBCU president and vice chair of President Joe Biden's Board of Advisors for HBCUs, I see firsthand the challenges of Black colleges, and I ask us all to commit to do all in our power to ensure the sustainability of HBCUs. If we truly are serious about eliminating economic disparities and improving the wealth of our population, then let's invest in the education of our sons and daughters, and let's choose HBCUs, those historically underfunded, under-resourced institutions, treasured institutions that produce top-tier talent across the country, talent that benefits not only this economy, but the world at large. This is the key to a brighter tomorrow, to reversing generations of financial inequities and social injustices for African Americans, building competitive students to be productive in a global marketplace. So let's stand together, band together, stay together, pray together as we assist this generation and do all that God has assigned for us to do.
Not many people know that the March on Washington in 1963 was actually about bringing a list of 10 demands to then President John Kennedy. A guarantee to the right to vote, desegregation of schools, access to affordable housing, a federal living wage rate, fair employment practices, and a jobs training program. 60 years later, the United States has allowed provisions of the 1965 Voting Rights Act to be gutted, and Congress looks the other way at state legislation that continues to suppress voting rights. Our public schools are more segregated and underfunded than ever. Access to affordable housing continues to evade too many. Women's reproductive rights are under assault. And as women, we're usually the ones making healthcare decisions, but most of us lack access to affordable healthcare. The American dream is not only deferred, but it is ready to explode, because racism is such a scourge that people will actually fight against societal change to provide for all if it means that people of color will actually benefit from programs designed to ensure that everyone has enough. So today we lift our voices to say that America still has not kept her promises. We are still waiting to make good on that promissory note, to cash that check that Dr. King spoke of 60 years ago. And we will not be silent. The voices of women across this land rise up today to call for America to be the country that we say we are. To do that, people of all faiths must have the courage to stand for our moral convictions and hold this nation to account. May God grant us enough wisdom, enough courage, enough love to work to ensure that America lives up to her ideals.
I'm Sheila Katz, CEO of National Council of Jewish Women, the largest Jewish feminist civil rights organization in the United States. We're gathering today, August 28th, 68 years since Emmett Till was lynched and 60 years since the historic March on Washington. Today, we honor Emmett Till, and we honor his mother, Mamie, who insisted the world see what it had done to her child. Along with Mamie, we honor all the women of the civil rights movement whose bodies and children were on the line. And it also seems fitting that we're gathered today during the Jewish month of Elul, when Jews prepare for our high holidays, when we are instructed to consider both the harms of the past and how we can achieve our hopes for a more whole future as a community. So we reflect. Children are still dying from police violence, from guns in schools, from poverty. Families are still suffering from a moral failing in our policies, from losing the expanded child tax credit, and in many places paid school lunches. And women aren't even considered equal in our own Constitution, despite the fact that we just hit over 100 years of fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment to ensure that the laws protect all, regardless of gender. But we will not lose sight of the world we know we can build together. More women are in leadership positions than ever before, turning anger into action and pain into purpose. Together, organizations like Repairers of the Breach, League of Women Voters, Black Voters Matter, National Council of Jewish Women, and all others participating in today's Moral Monday event are fighting for a country where our rights are not up for debate. I want to bless us that we find resilience even when it feels like the arc of the moral universe is taking too long to bend in the right direction. That everyone has access to healthcare and can make decisions for their own bodies. That all children are raised in safety and wholeness. That our systems set them up for a future in which they can thrive. May we always remember that we who seek justice are the majority in this country, and we can and will shape a better future. Amen.
Hello, hello. I'm Kelly Robinson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm proud to serve as president of the Human Rights Campaign, our nation's largest LGBTQ plus civil rights organization. And I'm even prouder to join Bishop Barber, the Repairers of the Breach, and all of you as we honor our history and we honor the fight for our future. You know, in 1963, the leaders of the civil rights movement, they marched for jobs and for freedom. And here we are 60 years later. For LGBTQ plus Americans, our freedom to simply be is still under attack. Our freedom to fly a pride flag in allyship without getting shot like Lori Carlton did. Our freedom to dance in the streets without getting stabbed like O'Shea Sibley did. Our freedom to walk down the street without getting gunned down like Coco did. 14 trans people have been violently killed just this year. Real-life violence is spinning out of political violence and spinning further out of our control every single day. That's why this year, For the first time ever, the Human Rights Campaign declared a state of emergency for LGBTQ plus Americans. This was in response to more than 550 anti-LGBTQ plus bills that have been introduced in states just this year. Half of those bills have targeted the trans community, many specifically targeting our trans youth. And more than 75 anti-LGBTQ plus bills have now become law. And we know the extremists who are going after gender-affirming care are the same ones that are going after abortion care. The extremists who are banning LGBTQ plus books are also rewriting Black history. They are weaponizing intersectionality, y'all, and now is the time that we have to harness it. Our movement is stronger when we work in coalition. Just think about Bayard Rustin, who in 1963 was the chief organizer for the March on Washington. He couldn't and would not separate his queerness from his Blackness, and neither will I. And so we can't separate LGBTQ plus rights from civil rights, from labor rights, from women's rights, from immigrant justice, from environmental justice. These fights, they are multiplying. But we contain multitudes. And if we unite, by God, I know that we will win. 60 years ago, Congressman John Lewis, he stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and said, "We do not want our freedom gradually, but we want to be free now." Today, let us add that we don't want our freedoms one by one. We want freedom everywhere, for everyone, in every part of our lives, without exception. So let's keep fighting. Let's finish what was started in 1963, and let's get free.
Hey y'all, it's Joy Reid from MSNBC's The Readout, and as we commemorate the March on Washington, I just feel like we need to reconnect with the original purpose of the march. I think that march has been reduced in so many ways to 250,000 people gathered on the National Mall and a few lines from Dr. King's speech, but it was so much more than that. It was a call to moral justice. It was a demand to pass the Civil Rights Act. It was a demand of the President of the United States and the Congress to act. It was a demand not just for racial justice and civic justice, but also for economic justice. To say that people in this country, Black folk in particular, should not have to be subjected to want, to economic want, to a lack of health care, to a lack of opportunity, to a lack of the basic dignity of being a citizen. And that needed to change, and that politicians had to do better than to say that this was the best that they could do. It was a demand, a moral demand, for an end to racial terrorism, but also an end to economic terrorism. And it was a demand that came from the moral center of this country, which is the descendants of slaves, Black folks who have always fought for a justice that would go beyond just the Black community. Because when we get justice, we share justice. So let's reconnect with the moral demands of that march, because we can do better. And when we stand together and make our voices unified, we will do better. Let's make every Monday a Moral Monday. Peace, y'all.
My name is Kelly Hamlin Sullivan, and I am in the 6th grade and part of the Justice Warriors of the North Carolina Poor People's Campaign. My family teaches me to be a lifelong learner. I believe that everyone should commit to continuous education, including the general public, faith communities, the American government, and even people in other nations. When we learn more, we can make better decisions. When we make better decisions, we can live better lives. Here are some things I have learned. As Christians, we are to love and not hate, and we are all made in the image of God. Thus, when I see the parents of my gay friends providing for them love and having respect for others, I know they have learned about Jesus and have decided to honor him by loving their gay children. I have classmates who spent their entire summer break at home in their house because their parents did not have the money to send to any camps or programs. Those programs would have helped my classmates remember what they learned during the school year or even something new. Everyone should have access to education, no opportunities. How else will people be ready for their jobs when they're older? My learnings about Jesus are making me wonder why there are poor and hungry people in my neighborhood and school. I have classmates who cannot afford to pay for lunch. I often see families walking on the highway with groceries from Walmart. They do not have a car, and we don't don't have a big transportation system where I live. Every time I see on the news that someone was killed on Highway 29, I think of those families with so many who say they believe in Jesus. I think they should think like Jesus and make good decisions. Good laws will help poor and hungry people to not be poor and hungry. I'm in the 6th grade. I have learned that it is not God's will that people are killed for supporting gay people. It is not God's will that people don't have access to education, that people are hungry, or that people are poor. I don't know why others, particularly some adults, have not learned these things and more. But don't worry, I'm going to make sure that more people and know what justice is. I commit to speak up, act up, and pray up, so that all humans will have food, safe shelter, clean water, and dignity and respect. Those made in the image of God deserve. I am Kelly Hamlin Sullivan. Join me in creating justice for all. That's what Jesus would do.
Good evening. My name is Bishop Tanya Rawls, and I am founder and executive director of the Freedom Center for Social Justice in Charlotte, North Carolina. We are a culture-shifting organization committed to the growth, safety, and empowerment of marginalized populations, particularly people of color, LGBTQ people, and the poor. 20 years ago, my 16-year-old godson at the time came out to me and told me that he identified as female and always had. I learned that day that I had a goddaughter and not a godson. I also learned that she had contemplated suicide and attempted it on multiple occasions because of the alienation and pain she felt at school in particular. The teachers, coaches, students, counselors, no one inside of the system was willing to help her birth parents or my spouse and I support this amazing human being. My daughter was one of the fortunate ones. She lived. However, not without lifelong scars and damage caused by those years of not being supported. People judging because of the length of her hair and the color of her fingernails. 20 years later, here I speak yet again, not for my child, but for the thousands of children and families who feel as desperate as we did for their kids to just have an unobstructed fair shot at a quality life and future. Data from the National Library of Medicine indicated that 82% of trans individuals have considered killing themselves, and 40% have attempted suicide, with suicide rates highest among trans youth. These families are literally fighting for their loved ones' lives. As an out Black lesbian cleric who has been through my own fair share of oppressions, I cannot believe there are those who would dare to use our trans family and trans and gender nonconforming youth as their newest targets. We say, hell no. You cannot come for our youth and expect us to sit back and watch these politically motivated acts across the nation go unattested. For those who may feel I am making much ado about nothing, let me give you a little quick public service announcement as I close my remarks about how bad things really are. This year alone, more than 506 anti-trans bills, this year alone, have been offered up in states across the nation, many of them, most of them targeting trans youth. We live in a nation that considers drag queens more dangerous than threats by gun violence. Since May of 2022, more than 1,700 gun bills were offered up to make gun access easier, even though gun violence is recorded as one of the leading causes of death among our children. If things are going to change, we have got to change them. The change must come first within ourselves, in our houses and spaces of worship, in our communities, and yes, in our legislatures. We've done it before. We can do it again, but not without us being intentional about fighting for the least of these wherever they may show up. And right now, that is our trans young people. They need you. Help us. May it be so.
Hi, my name is Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris, and I'm the director of the Cairo Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice. I'm also the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. It is an honor to be a part of this Moral Monday, on the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. It is clear today that the promise of these yet-to-be United States has not yet been realized. Not in a rich nation where kids are going hungry, not in a democracy where we have fewer voting rights today than we did generations ago. Not in this land of the free and home of the brave where women and LGBTQ folk are under attack and there are millions of veterans and others who have no place to call home. On this anniversary of the historic March on Washington, I lift up Ms. Anna Arnold Hedgeman, the only woman on the organizing committee for the March on Washington who helped organize literally tens of thousands of people, including so many white Christians, to take part in this historical assembly. Who organized Operation Sandwich, preparing 80,000 boxed lunches to make sure folks who attended the March on Washington had the provisions they needed to make their demonstration powerful. In Ms. Arnold Hedgeman's honor, I lift up the unsung heroines of our movement, of the past, present, and future, those grassroots leaders who do what Ella Baker called the spade work, the slow and thankless work of building leaders, developing connections, and showing up and showing up. The many named and unnamed community members who are keeping up the fight to guarantee that all have a right to thrive and not just barely survive. Fight poverty, not the poor. The struggle continues.
Hi, my name is Raquel Rosari, and I am part of La Iglesia del Pueblo, a part of the Poor People's Campaign, and also myself and my husband have been taking food to the hungry and homeless down at 42nd Street Port Authority for the past 8 years. One of the things that we've seen is that our people that are there are people who have sort of fallen through the cracks of society, people who don't have families that will take them in, or people who have mental illness, and people who might be addicted to substances. What I want to talk about are the people who have mental health issues. At this point in time, since July, after the public health emergency was declared ended, 3.8 million people have been taken off the Medicaid rolls. And according to the Commonwealth Fund, approximately 15 million people will be kicked off these rolls by the end of the year, I believe, when the states finish going through all their enrollments and checking to see and reassessing people. People need their mental health services. They need to be able to keep themselves healthy, physically healthy, mentally healthy, so that they can address the issues that are going on in their lives, keep themselves housed in their own homes instead of being evicted and put out into the streets. Because that's what I see, people who, and once a person does get out onto the street, their mental health does not get any better, it just gets worse. And the chances of them living a happier life and getting back into society is much, much worse. So in terms of saving money for the public, you don't save any money at all. It's a penny wise, pound foolish. If you take care of people ahead of time, you can save them a lot of pain and suffering in the future. So that's what I want to say today, and how important it is that we in the Poor People's Campaign continue to fight for people who need their mental health services, who need their health services, and everyone should have the right to take care of their health. Thank you.
Hola, mi nombre es Raquel Irizarry y yo soy una de las miembros de la Iglesia del Pueblo. Nosotros somos parte de la campaña de los pobres. Hoy yo quiero hablar sobre el trabajo que mi esposo y yo hicimos por estos ahora 8 años. Nosotros traemos comida a la gente sin hogares y que tienen hambre en la calle 42 en Port Authority, aquí en Nueva York. Y lo que nosotros encontramos que hay mucha gente allí que tienen problemas mentales, gentes que cayeron afuera de la comunidad social, que no tienen apoyo de sus familias, que no tienen amistades, y también gente que tienen problemas con las drogas. Y lo que yo quiero hablar de hoy es que de julio 2023, 3.5 millones de personas lo echaron de Medicaid. Y dice el Commonwealth Fund que después de todos los estados van a mirar a toda la gente que están en las listas de Medicaid, y que cuando ellos terminan, más o menos va a ser como 11 millones de gente que lo van a echar de Medicaid. Esto es una tragedia, porque hay gente que se pueden quedar en sus casas, gente que necesitan. La salud mental es muy, muy importante, como la salud física. Y gente necesitan el Medicaid para ir al doctor. Y mucha gente se pueden quedar y no deben estar desalojados, porque si tienen el foco, se pueden quedar en sus casas, se pueden mantenerse. Entonces, esto pensando muy corto, porque, por ejemplo, si una persona está en la calle, no pueden regresar a un ambiente de casa tan rápidamente. Específicamente si cuando se caen en la calle, ellos se ponen peor, no mejor. Se ponen mucho más peor. Entonces, si uno le da el apoyo adelante, podemos evitar mucho sufrimiento en esta vida. Entonces, eso es lo que yo quiero decir hoy. Gracias por oírme.
I am Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson, General Minister and President of the United Church of Christ. We gather together today to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington, D.C., an event that was inspired by the atrocities of the day as African Americans and people of African descent in these United States struggled for their civil rights. 60 years later, the call is still the same. It is clear and strong for us to be advocates for justice for all. While we can celebrate the many achievements and accomplishments of our forebears, the call is here for us today. Racism is still alive and well among us. Economic disparities are determining the lives and outcomes of millions who lack the opportunities for quality education and opportunities that would increase the quality of life of millions of people of African descent. Today, we gather in common commitment to answer the call to be repairers of the breach, the restorers of the streets to live in. We are called to ensure all have access to a living wage and have the opportunity to live with their full human rights, with dignity and with respect. Today,
The list of injustices that are among us are too many to enumerate, along with their intersectionalities. We have work to do. The urgency of 60 years ago is still with us. Our presence is needed to bring the changes and to continue the work started 60 years ago. We are the voices calling out in the wilderness for this season of change. We will usher in. There is nothing too hard for our God. We have seen the yield of the seeds planted 60 years ago. We will continue the march started on August 28th, 1963, until all are free and flourishing and living with dignity. May it be so. Amen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Barbara Arnwine, president and founder of the Transformative Justice Coalition. I'm also formerly of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. It is my honor to speak at this event. Thank you to the Poor People's Campaign for marshaling women's voices so that she speaks as heard. Think about it. Back in 1963, major Black women speakers like Daisy Bates, young, amazing leaders like Diane people like Ella Baker, Paula Mary, oh my God, Satima Clark, all Rosa Parks, all of these women were not heard during that march. So it's my pleasure to be able to join the women of today who are fighting. I want to also say really clearly and succinctly that our mission of today must be to lift up our young people. We got to fight for their leadership. We got to fight to make sure they have every skill, every opportunity they can to be leaders in this moment, because they are the change makers that we need, not only for the future, but for today. And I want to be very clear that we cannot achieve racial justice, climate justice. We cannot have the fulfillment of a multiracial democracy and where there's economic justice for all people without our young people being in the leadership. They are the largest voting cohort in the country. Let's make sure to invest our time and energy in them, just like Jim Lawson did, just like so many other leaders like Fannie Lou Hamer would do later. All of these people who invested in our young people, let's be like them. And I want to say a special word to our Black women leaders of today, to Maxine Waters, to Latasha Brown, to Gay McDougall, to Alicia Garza, to Kimberly Crenshaw, to Helen Butler, Julianne Malveaux, Patrice Kohlers, Opal Tometi, Sheila Jackson Lee, and so many others. Thank you. Just keep fighting. We will get there. Justice is ours.
Today, August 28th, 60 years ago, there was a march on Washington for jobs and freedom. Today, we're fighting for jobs and freedom, but we're fighting for our rights. We're fighting for our freedom. We're fighting for justice. We're fighting for opportunity. We're fighting for the right to live. We're fighting to make sure that we are not erased in this country. White nationalism and racism is running rampant in this country, but we will not be erased. We will win this fight for our rights and our freedoms and our justice, and we have the power of the vote to do that. We together can change this country. We can end poverty in this country. We can bring opportunity in this country. Women, we are not, Black women, as a Black woman, I know we're under attack, but we're going to stand shoulder to shoulders with our brothers and our sisters, Black, white, Asian, Pacific Islander, Latino, LGBTQ, and more. We will fight and we will win together.
There is, as Martin Luther King Jr. said some 60 years ago on this day, an urgency of now. This is the urgency to make real the dreams of parents, the dreams of mothers, the dreams of women, to protect the lives and indeed the dreams of their children. I speak this evening with the urgency of a dream handed down to me by my mother. Hers was a dream that seemed for her to be on its way to becoming reality that hot Wednesday afternoon in August when King delivered to the nation a dream for his children, a dream for all children. I remember it like it was yesterday when my mother called my brother, two sisters, and me in the living room to watch King proclaim his urgent dream. What I did not realize then was that the dream my mother had for her 4 children was indeed the same dream that King had for his children. It was a dream to live in a world free of anti-Black racial hatred, a dream where they could live freely into whomever God had created them to be. It was the same dream that Mamie Till no doubt had for her young son, Emmett Lewis Till, who 8 years earlier, to the very day of the March on Washington, was dragged from a relative's Mississippi home and lynched after being falsely accused of flirting with a 22-year-old white woman. It is no doubt the same dream that O'Shea Sibley's mother had for him before he was stabbed to death at a gas station last month because he was a Black gay man. As women, as mothers, as parents, as inheritors of King's dream, we face an urgency of now, today, to create a different present and hence foster a more just future for our children and their children and those future children we cannot see. This urgency of now indeed begins today, compelling us to tell the truth about the brutal realities of race and sexism and homophobia in this country. To do otherwise means the generations to come will be captive to the false narratives of history and thus captive to anti-Black, anti-women, anti-LGBTQ white supremacist notions of what justice actually looks like. And so there is an urgency of now for those of us committed to King's dream of freedom and justice for all. It is untenable to simply remember what happened 60 years ago at the Lincoln Memorial and then stand quietly by on the sidelines while, for instance, a movement to ban books and to purge curriculums of the harsh realities of anti-Black racism, of transphobia, trans-terrorism proliferates across this country. There is an urgency for us as women to act. There's an urgency for us as women to show up. There is an urgency to resist. There is an urgency of now to tell the truth about this nation's history so that we can indeed foster a more just future for our children and their children and children everywhere.
My name is Heidi Scherholz, and I am the president of the Economic Policy Institute, an organization that uses the tools of economics to fight for justice for working people. As we reflect on the pivotal moment in history that was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, it is crucial that we honor the often unsung women who played a vital role in this transformative era. Women such as Ella Baker, a brilliant organizer who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to empower grassroots movements, and Hattie Canty, a labor organizer who has been called one of the greatest strike leaders in the history of the United States, and who said, the labor movement and the civil rights movement, you cannot separate the two of them. These women, along with their sisters in the fight for justice, exemplify tenacity and resilience in the face of adversity. It's undeniable that our nation continues to grapple with enormous issues. Poverty, despite progress, still casts a long shadow over far too many lives. Income inequality persists, demanding that we fight for economic policies that generate good jobs and give power to working people. Racism, though challenged, remains deeply rooted in our society, calling for sustained efforts to address systemic injustices. In honoring the legacy of the women who fought for civil rights 60 years ago and those who do so today, let us pledge to be champions of change. The women of the civil rights movement showed us that collective action can transform societies. It is incumbent upon us to carry the torch of social and economic justice, ensuring that all voices are heard, especially those who have been historically silenced. Together, we can build a nation where the economy is strong and resilient, good jobs are plentiful, and where justice, equity, and fairness prevail.
Greetings. I'm Dr. Ashley Marshall with Forward Justice, and I'm honored to be here with you today. On this 60th anniversary of the March on Washington, let it be known that we are still marching. We are still marching for the women's voices who were left out of the march 60 years ago, but who continue to organize and mobilize at every turn because there's no other choice. We are still marching. We are still marching because we have yet to realize the full protections and expansions of voting rights in this country. We are still marching. We are still marching because of our communities like Jackson, Mississippi, who do not have clean water to bathe their children. We are still marching. We are still marching because our communities continue to be over-policed and underfunded. We are still marching. We are still marching because we've witnessed multiple states restrict reproductive health access with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and we continue to question the bodily autonomy and the rights of women. We are still marching. We are still marching because we have yet to heal from the historic harms and the tragic realities of living under poverty and racism in this country. We are still marching. We are still marching because we have a soaring, daring dream, a vision rooted in the wisdom to hold a politics of liberation that can lift the largest we. Because in our core and in our bones, we understand that our liberation is bounded together. And if you are not free, then I am not free.
How do we manage the wait time for justice? How did our foreparents march again and again and again? The wait is tough when we really need God and justice to come through. But it is not a test, beloved, if it does not test us. We must have a test to have a testimony. We are waiting and marching again for a real deliverance, not a facade. Our nation needs a justice anointing to change, a way out, a healing of deep pain, an ability to cease and desist the behaviors that seek to sabotage righteousness. Keep marching with your smooth stone, like David did toward his Goliath, confident that God was on his side. Let's walk together, children, until justice runs down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. And where God leads me, I will follow. And where God leads us, we must follow. And where God leads us, we shall follow. God is with us all the way. God bless.
On this 60th anniversary of the March on Washington, my heart is full thinking of the many women on whose shoulders I stand, and my friend and mentor Ann Braden is in my ear. 2 weeks after that march was my 10th birthday, and I would later learn that on that very same day, 4 young Black girls were killed in the bombing of 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. I didn't grow up knowing that Denise McNair was only 11, nearly my age when she was killed, or that the other girls were the age of my sister. But once I knew it, things could never be the same. That's what knowing our history does. That's why they don't want us to know it. And knowing our history is so crucial to our work now as we carry on to end poverty and racism and oppression. Like you, I want to live in a society that doesn't throw people away because of race or gender or who we love or some artificially drawn line of a country or the evil system of poverty that's set up and then blames people for being in it. To change all that can feel daunting sometimes, but to know that our elders who marched in 1963 were living and organizing in the South when it was literally a police state is informative and inspiring to us now. I want to lift up 2 quotes from Anne Braden, who always spoke of making the choice to be part of that other America, the America that doesn't throw people away. The first quote from Anne, as she speaks to me and my white siblings. In a sense, the battle is always and always has been a battle for the hearts and minds of white people in this country. The fight against racism is not something we're called on to help people of color with. We need to become involved as if our lives depended on it, because in truth, they do. And this quote from Anne, as she speaks to us all. In every age, no matter how cruel the oppression carried on by those in power, there have been those who struggled for a different world. I believe this is the genius of humankind, the thing that makes us half divine, the fact that some human beings can envision a world that has never existed. Let us continue to envision that world and build it together.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zakaya Jones Walker. I am a senior psychology major and entrepreneurship minor from Hopewell, Virginia, and I serve as Bennett College's 2-time Student Government Association president. I am honored to share and be a part of a space where the historic significance of a woman's fight for justice is being amplified, acknowledged, and celebrated. Spaces where women uplift one another while learning about change makers now and before our time are what we need to keep inspiring one another, especially when it's easy for a woman to be left out of the story. I've been blessed with the opportunity to find that space at Bennett College. Bennett Bells are known for being change makers in history, from leading movie theater boycotts in the Greensboro area due to the lack and misrepresentation of Black actors, encouraging voting within the community through Operation Door Knock, to being the central organizers of the Woolsworth demonstration in the 1960s. Furthermore, as a young Black woman in America, I've endured and witnessed poverty, racism, the lack of affordable health care, the impact of environmental justice on Black and brown communities, and so much more. But it was those experiences and learning that despite often being in the shadows, that women continue to change history that pushed me to advocate even harder. I am a member of Bennett College's Green Team. As SGA president, I ensure my sisters to vote and encourage the community to do the same. I've worked and will continue to work with the beloved Community Center in the Truth, Justice, Reconciliation, and Healing movement, and I will continue to do so much more for as long as I can. Ladies, my hope is that we continue to fight for change for the people and not the glory, despite it being well-deserved. Thank you so much for allowing me to be in this space in the celebration and amplifying of your voice and all women who have fought for justice.
It has been 60 years since Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., standing on the shoulders of boss, gifted, and dedicated women, powerfully and prophetically declared the urgency of now to hundreds of thousands gathered at the Lincoln Memorial. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy, he said. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. His words still ring true today, as do the encouraging words of Dr. Dorothy Irene Height that resonate deep in the souls of each of us longing for justice, equity, and freedom. If the time is not ripe, she said, we have to ripen the time. Time pushes us forward and injustice binds us together. We will not wait any longer than we already have. We will ripen the time. I can't help but wonder today how far the arc of the universe has bent towards justice over these last 6 decades and what we will do to make it bend a little faster. Daisy Bates, the only woman to speak at the march 60 years ago, once said this: "Surely the world we live in is but the world that lives in us." In my prophetic imagination, the world that we live in is one where poverty is no more. Everyone has what they need, not only to survive, but to thrive. People don't live on top of grates when it's cold or under overpasses when it's hot. Black mothers do not die at 3 times the rate of their white counterparts from pregnancy-related causes. Children have plenty to eat. Mass shootings, gun violence, systemic racism, and misogyny are distant memories. Our democracy is sound. Voting is without barriers. Zip codes don't determine our future, and affordable, accessible healthcare is available to all. My dream today mirrors that spoken by the prophet Isaiah to a community returning from exile, a community that had lost so much, but still believed and had hope that a better day was yet on the horizon. If they would not give up, if they kept pressing their way, if they would not settle, and if they continued to work together. My dream is in God's promise to a weary, traumatized, but hopeful people. I will appoint peace as your overseer and righteousness as your taskmaster. Violence shall no more be heard in your land, devastation or destruction within your borders. You shall call your wall salvation and your gates praise. It is possible. Forward together, not one step back. Amen. Ashe, and may it be so.
She Speaks Moral Monday is not just an event, but a rallying cry for us to recognize the unfinished work that lies before us. The struggle for jobs and freedom is so passionately championed then, remains a beacon guiding us through the challenges of today. 60 years have passed since that resounding march, yet the echoes of those footsteps still reverberate through our souls. As we commemorate the March of 1963, we are reminded that justice is an ongoing pursuit, but it doesn't have to be this way. The call to conscience urges us to ask ourselves, how far have we come? How much farther must we go? In a world where inequalities persist and opportunities remain out of reach for too many, we must respond with continued persistence and action. Let us remember the powerful words spoken by those who stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial 6 decades ago. Their vision was not just a dream. It was a demand for a society where every individual's potential is realized, where economic disparity is dismantled, and where freedom truly flourishes. Today, and more than ever before, we honor their legacy, and we must keep continuing to move forward together our struggle for justice and equality. The call to conscience resonates across time, inspiring us to address the pressing issues of our era: systemic racism, economic disparities, and social injustice. In Massachusetts, more than 20,000 men, women, and families have no place to call home. Homelessness, the most violent and visible expression of poverty, lifts every evil. Its impact on healthcare and the environment is a sin against God, the suffering and death to ask only for the right to housing. High rents and low wages must be replaced with living wages and affordable healthcare. In the richest nation, we should not have to resort to sleeping on grates, living in encampments, or dying on subways. Let us be the generation that amplifies the voices of the poor, the sick, the least of these. Let us dismantle the barriers that divide us and ensure that the promises made 60 years ago are not empty words, but lived realities for all. Let She Speaks Moral Monday be a catalyst for change, a reminder that the work of the march continues through us. In closing, Let us remember the courage of those who marched for jobs and freedom. Let us channel their spirit as we face the challenges of today. Let us keep saying their names. We stand on your shoulders, Fannie, Ella, Rosa, Anna Hedgeman, and more. Let us answer the call to conscience with determination, continued empathy, and action. Together, we can forge a future where justice and freedom prevail.
Reflecting on the past 60 years of struggle and movement building and protest, I'm so grateful for the legacy of the women and femmes who organized and mobilized, and just, look how far we've come. And there's still so much work to do. We have a responsibility to face the challenges of our day and demand justice and demand all the things we're told are impossible. And I think we need to lead with love and solidarity to build the beloved community. The interlocking injustices of systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, militarism, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism perpetuate a lie of scarcity. It's rationalized then by elected officials and the ruling class, and we see it play out in our daily lives by the policies that they pass. It's what continues to deny all poor and low-wealth people our full humanity, and it's how poverty is a death sentence to 800 people a day. I have a message of love and solidarity for anyone like me who's ever relied on food stamps, made less than a living wage, slept on a friend's couch when they've lost their job, lost their housing, had to choose between a $2 bus fare and food, those who stay up at night thinking about their student debt, their medical debt, or the loved ones they've lost to addiction, to gun violence, to incarceration, to all forms of poverty and policy violence. To not be silent anymore. Make no mistake, we live in a world of abundance. A redistribution of wealth and resources is possible, and it's necessary for the survival of our people and our planet. And I'm here to listen and to mourn with you and to be angry with you and to stand beside you, because we need this radical love and solidarity of caring for one another and joining together across all of the lines of division to demand justice.
The 60th anniversary of the March on Washington is an opportunity to reflect on the state of the nation, considering where we were, where we are now, and where we are headed. The courageous freedom fighters who gathered 6 decades ago envisioned an inclusive and multiracial democracy where all Americans, regardless of race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, economic status, or ability, will be treated with dignity and respect. While we have made significant strides in civil rights legislation, the painful reality is that we have witnessed enormous setbacks in recent years. We must make urgent changes if we hope to build the kind of democracy our predecessors envisioned. Despite the many political gains over the years, racism and white supremacy persist in all aspects of American life and culture. From police violence and mass incarceration to voter suppression and unequal access to housing, the social and economic disparities that shape the lives of Black and Brown people are all legacies of slavery and colonialism. Knowing this history is significant, and we must resist all efforts to block the teaching of these narratives in our schools. There's another aspect of this history that we must also never forget, and that is the strength, courage, and perseverance of those who came together on August 28th, 1963. They maintained a hope that change is possible, and they left a legacy on which we can now build. As we commemorate the March on Washington, let's renew our commitment to building an inclusive and multiracial democracy that acknowledges the rights and dignity of all people.
60 years ago, on that extraordinary day, none of the speakers talked directly about war. On that day, there were already about 16,000 U.S. troops in Vietnam, but hardly anyone knew that. Most of the soldiers were called advisors or simply personnel. The war, the U.S. war against Vietnam, had hardly begun. But the cost of militarism and war was almost certainly on the minds of the women and men organizing the march and those who came to Washington to participate. That year, 1963, even though the war had hardly begun, almost 9% of the wealth of the entire country went to the military. That meant there was already not enough money for jobs, for healthcare, for education, for childcare, for all the things our families needed and would need, even with victories for civil rights. And who, among all the organizers and planners of the march, were most aware of that stark reality? It was the women who, along with organizing the march and the movement it represented, faced the frontline challenges at home, keeping their families fed and warm, their children in decent schools, their elders able to see a doctor. And they knew even then, years before Dr. King reminded us from the pulpit of Riverside Church that a country that spends more on the military than on social programs is approaching spiritual death. They knew that. They knew that war and militarism were destroying the economy of our country, and that those most vulnerable, those who still were denied equality and human rights, would pay the biggest price. So it was part of the agenda of the march, mentioned or not. And internationalism, the world's answer to war, was there too that hot August day 60 years ago. When the great artist and resistance fighter Josephine Baker rose to speak, she had flown to Washington from France just to participate in the march. She celebrated the unity of the movement, the Black and white and other people working together. You are, she said, just as I've always wanted you to be, and the peoples of the world have always wanted you to be. You are a united people at last, because without unity, there cannot be any victory. There was unity that day, and because there was unity, there was victory too. For our future, we will build even greater unity and have a chance for even greater victory, for equality, for human rights, for an end to war and militarism. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kate Ziegler, and I am a national organizing co-director for Repairs of the Breach and for the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. It is an honor to be amongst so many incredible leaders here on this Moral Monday. Today, 60 years since the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, I have a bittersweet feeling. It is powerful to be a woman, but it is also oftentimes a heavy and oppressive burden. Similarly bittersweet, I honor the women who have come before me and the decades of organizing work that has brought us much progress, but it is also an immoral shame that we still must gather and demand our basic rights today, not just as women, but for the 140 million poor and low-wealth people in this country. The fact cannot be ignored, nor celebrated, nor commemorated that we are still a nation in crisis, still a nation that needs a mass movement for jobs and freedom. So with this, we must call ourselves to conscience. We must call on the nation's conscience and take a day like today to recommit, to keep working from the ground up and to continue building a multiracial movement of the poor and dispossessed, with women of all creeds, colors, faiths, and sexualities, and with people who do not identify as women or as any gender. For if there was ever a time for us to come across lines of division, to demand our living wages, our voting rights now, our reproductive rights now, access to healthcare, and ending poverty now, it is today. We must call this nation and its elected officials to conscience and to task now. For together, not one step back.
Hello, my name is Pam Garrison. I'm Tri-Chair of the West Virginia Poor People's Campaign. We're here today to remember the March on Washington, D.C. And when I think of that, I think of the feeling it would be to have that many people come together in one place for the same cause. And it makes me think of our Moral March on Washington, D.C., June the 15th of 2022. Standing there looking out at that sea of people, of 150,000 or more of us there together, to pledge that we will do what it takes to end poverty, to end suffering, to make things just and equal and fair. And it was a feeling that I'll never get over. And I can imagine what those people there have felt. And they laid the bricks for us that we walk upon now. To know that we have solutions. We have the third Reconstruction. And that's what we're fighting for. We're fighting for us. We're fighting for the bottom up. And that's us. It makes me think of Fannie Lou Hamer and coming from West Virginia, Mother Jones, who lived and saw working families, kids going hungry, who saw the lack of health care and people suffering, who saw the homelessness of it. They just couldn't take it anymore. And that's what that gathering was about. It was a unity, a fusion of people of all different diversities coming together and speaking with one voice, one heart. And the aura that comes out of that of justice and unity is something that you will always carry and have with you, and it's the spark that lights the fire. So I want to thank you, and I want to tell you, put on your armor of justice, because our forefathers and our foremothers, they have laid it out for us, and we have to finish the fight that they started. So thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here and for being part of the movement. Thank you.
60 years ago, the nation witnessed hundreds and thousands of people gather in Washington, D.C. to lift up a long overdue demand for the needs for jobs and freedom. Today, we're still lifting up the same overdue demand for jobs and freedom. And when we're calling for our demands, we're making sure that all voices are heard. We are making sure that the voices that are too often marginalized and silenced and erased are the very voices that are centered. We gather here today, like the many women before us who have gathered, to make sure that the issues that impact all of us are being heard and addressed. We are raising the issue that in this country of abundance, in this country, poverty is the fourth leading cause of death. And that nearly 1/3 of our workforce, that's about 52 million people, earn less than $15 an hour. This includes 40% of working women and 50% of working women of color. We are raising the issue that our Mother Earth continues to be abused, neglected, pillaged, and destroyed, and we are in dire need of a right relationship with her. We are raising the issue that our families continue to be torn apart because of financial hardships, because of cruel and antiquated immigration laws, because of gun violence, because of the lack of sufficient familial support, whether that be the upgraded and increased child tax credit or having access to affordable and quality childcare. Across this country, across racial backgrounds and class backgrounds, language backgrounds, religious backgrounds, any type of lines that try to divide us, we are here and we have been here and we will continue to be here to come out together and raise our voices and take action towards the solutions that can be recognized today. We don't have another 60 years to wait for the solutions that we know to be impactful to be implemented today. Join a social justice movement, join an organizational effort, join a community cause that is dedicated to addressing the death-dealing systemic injustices that are impacting us all. Register to vote and vote in your local, state, and national elections. We all can do our part. And if we do it today, we're making sure that tomorrow is better for everyone.
Today, I stand before you, inspired and invigorated by the power of unity and collective action. We find ourselves at a pivotal moment in history where the call for change resonates more strongly than ever before. The time has come for women to join hands and hearts in the movement of repairers of the breach, the League of Women Voters, Black Voters Matter, the Beloved Community, and other organizations for progress. We hold the keys to shaping policies, altering legislation, and holding our elected officials accountable. Our foremothers paved the way for us with their unwavering determination, courage, and resilience. Now we must build upon their legacy and further the work they began. We have witnessed the power of unity in every stride, every protest, and every ballot cast. It is time to harness that power to drive sustainable change. Joining forces with repairers of the breach, we mend the fractures of our society, stitching together the torn fabric of justice and equality. Standing alongside the League of Women Voters amplifies our voices in the halls of power, demanding transparency, fairness, and representation. Through Black Voters Matter, we recognize that our collective votes can reshape the trajectory of our nation, tearing down barriers and paving the way for true equity. As members of a beloved community, we understand that our destinies are interwoven and our successes are shared. We carry the torch of empathy, compassion, and unity, illuminating a path towards understanding and harmony. Within our faith communities, we are to find strength and inspiration to fuel our journey towards a more just and inclusive society. But our journey doesn't end here. Our journey doesn't end at this virtual movement. We must utilize our collective voices, our resources, and resolve to hold our elected officials accountable. We must wield our votes as instruments of change, reminding those in power that we demand justice, equality, and progress. The time has come to bridge the gap between policy and reality, to ensure that the laws that govern us reflect the values we hold dear, that everybody has the inherent quality of life. And in the face of adversity, we are to find our strength. In unity, we are finding our power. As women, we have the unique ability to shape the present and the future. Let us rise to the occasion, becoming the change makers we were born to be. Together, as women, we can mend, uplift, empower, and transform. As moral witnesses for all those, we are the moral compass for our nation. Let us join hands together, my brothers and my sisters, join hands together, my faith communities, join hands together, our organizations for the just and equitable society in which we hold dear.
What does the Lord require of thee? What does the Lord require of thee? But to do justly, love, mercy, walk humbly with God. Woe unto thee, expressive decree. They should do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with God. What does the Lord require of thee? What does the Lord require of thee? But to do justly,